So good evening. Good evening. I welcome you to the first meeting of our new term. And so we will begin. We have three of us returning from the previous budget committee. So, Deborah, I will start with you with just a short introduction, and welcome to the budget committee.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Want to say anything else in terms of background or anything you would like to say?
I wasn't planning on it, but hold on. This is my second term on the BET, and I'm very excited to be joining the ranks of the BET Budget Committee. It's really, a big part of what we do on the BET, so I look forward to the opportunity. I go to most of the meetings anyway, but I think it'll be different sitting on the other side and meeting with all the departments. So we've got a lot of challenges ahead of us, so it's going to be an interesting year. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Deborah. Jeff?
Since I'm always a person of few words, I'll just spare you all and say nothing. That can be said without a microphone. I think you all know me. I really will spare you on this occasion.
Leslie?
I also really have nothing to add. We have work ahead of us, and I'm sure we will work together to accomplish that as best we can.
Great. So, I'm Leslie Tarkington, and I think everyone knows that. So what we will just want to make a couple of announcements. Our whole budget cycle starts on Thursday evening with the budget presentation by our first selectman, then the Board of Education, and finally the BET Budget Committee's budget hearing. And that the budget starts at 6 with Mr. Camillo, and the BET Budget Committee meeting is at 7, all in the Town Hall meeting room. And then begins the hard work next Tuesday, beginning at 10 o'clock, again in the Town Hall meeting room, and our first selectman will present his budget to the Budget Committee at that point in time. So with that, I shall proceed with today's agenda. And I think our item number NW2, Jeff?
Yeah, I would make a motion on that item that we hold that in abeyance for the moment, pending Larry Simon's arrival, since that's a motion to suspend the rules would require a second and a two-thirds vote.
And vote? All those in favor? Okay. So I guess our first item, actually, that we'll be hearing is from Parks and Rec, and Joe Siciliano is going to present the two items.
I love when that happens.
So welcome, Joe.
Perfect
You get to leave early.
5:03 before Larry, that's even better. Good evening. I have two applications, Parks and Recreation 1, Parks and Recreation 2 in front of you. They both pertain to the golf course, and we'll deal with request for additional appropriation for PR1, $14,550. At the signing of each agreement for the concession contract, it is written in the contract that we will replace the carpeting surfacing at the golf course. Last year, when we signed the contract in March, the golf course was set to open April 1st. There wasn't really any time to put the carpeting in place. So in keeping with our commitment in the contract for the concession, I'm here to ask for the funding for the carpet replacement, which is that $14,550. We will commence putting the carpet in shortly based on the approval. And the money for this carpeting will come out of the golf course revolving fund. It's not part of the tax levy. This is the fees and that are collected from the course. As of June 30th, there was $873,000 in the account, and there's more than adequate funds to fund this project. So that's the request.
Great. Any questions? Leslie?
Just one. Typically, this would have been budgeted in last fiscal year. Was it just an oversight, or was it the contract wasn't expected to come up for renewal?
The contract kind of fell in between, so we were already out of the budget cycle for last year. I mean, we signed the contract in March. It had already been approved. Our budget's already been approved by the BET at that point, and So for the current year that we're in, so we have to come for, we have to come for an interim. It happened the last time we did the carpeting too, that it's an awkward schedule depending on how many years the contract goes with the concessionaire.
Is it a fixed contract term, or is it that
It's
it has option
It's a 2-year with
clauses?
3 one-year options.
Okay, so you don't know if you're going to exercise the option at
That's
the time you're
correct.
putting your budget together?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay? Okay.
No, so, I mean, just to sort of complete the thought then, so had you done the installation in April, that would have come as an interim appropriation in March or April or May at the time. And because you weren't doing the installation, you're coming for the interim appropriation now.
That's correct.
Okay. And then, as you pointed out, it doesn't, the funds reside in fund balance, and the fund balance of the golf course, and these funds will be pulled from fund balance. So too with the next one we'll be looking at in just a minute.
Correct.
Thank you.
Deborah?
Just to clarify, if it's coming from fund balance, but yet you're saying you have money in the revolving fund, how does the money get
That's
from?
the fund balance, I'm
that-
sorry.
okay.
I'm sorry, when I said fund balance, I meant to say it's in the fund balance of the golf course.
Thank you. I thought you meant general fund.
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you.
of course, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I didn't put that very well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you have any more questions?
Application PR2, this is for additional appropriation again. This did come to us recently about the water treatment system at the golf course. This is for the portable water that is used by, the users of the golf course, the restaurant, the water fountains, et cetera, all the restrooms. Both the DEP and the EPA have conducted some survey of the water treatment systems for portable water. The findings were both also supported by the local and state health departments. The golf course treatment system is kind of out of current requirements in the sense that we have to filter our water at a different rate. This is just to meet new standards of filtration. And so we have to establish a holding tank system and then a pressurized system. It'll deliver the water to all of the fixtures and all the buildings. The current system, as best that we can look at, is about 20 years old. We've made various repairs. So it's just outdated, older type filtration system, and we'll be going to a new carbon filter system with a holding tank and a pressurized distribution. Unfortunately, it's $52,000, but we do have a commercial operation at the golf course. It provides water to all the fountains, the restaurant, all the restrooms, the administration building, pro shop, and all of the restrooms down on the lower end of the course also. It's an expensive proposition, but again, it's based on their review and requirements to do a replacement of the system. So I'm coming to you for an interim appropriation to actually do that and to see if we can get the system up and going and, get their requirements behind us and so that we can start to move forward with a new treatment system. So this is very doable in the near future. We've looked into it. We have talked to some of our folks that do installation, and they've been working with us not only to meet the requirements, but also to meet the state, to make sure that the state DEP and the EPA are both satisfied with the type of system that we're going to be putting in. So we've had that kind of discussion already.
Mr. Raymer?
So the only oddity there, I assume this system is a durable system. It lasts for a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades. It lasts a long time. So one might have thought maybe that it might have been handled as a capital appropriation. From a timing standpoint, is it better that it not wait and go through a capital appropriation process in the upcoming budget cycle and therefore not be done until after the 1st of July? Is that a problem?
I think what the concern is that we move forward and start to implement, and that we don't wait a whole nother the primary season for golf is coming up to April through like October.
That's right, yeah.
So that we get some of the filtration components in place so that the water is, I don't want to call it unsafe because it's not.
Right.
It just will it'll be upgraded to meet the new standard. So decision between myself and Al Manelli, who were working together on this project, decided that we'd come for the interim appropriation, satisfy some immediate needs of getting the system up, in place, and then, before the actual golf season starts. We're going to wait a whole nother 6 or 8 months before we can actually do this install if we can't do it now. So that's the reason why I'm after the funds at this point.
I have no objection to the
Yeah.
item. I'll vote in favor of it. I just thought the quirk was that it's being handled as operating rather than capital, it's being handled as an interim or whatever, but the purpose of that is to get it done now before the
Correct.
season starts.
Correct.
Jeff, sorry, it's a capital project.
It's capital.
Oh, this is a capital project?
Yeah.
Capital project, yes.
But we're going to fund it out of the fund balance, the accumulated fund balance in the revolving account.
We do that with Witherell, too.
Okay,
We're
all right.
it's an depreciable item.
Okay, okay. Thank you. And thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Jeff.
I'd like to make a motion to approve PR1
What?
and,
No,
you have a
I
question?
still have a couple
Okay,
questions.
go ahead.
So, Joe, how often does the EPA and the DEEP test, water? Is this something that's frequent or infrequent or, usual or unusual?
Probably in my career, it's probably been about every 10 years or so. But, and I've only been managing the golf course for 20 years. So, it's probably at least twice. The local health department does take water samples for portable drinking water regularly. But this was more of an equipment inspection versus an inspection for the quality of the water, because the water is drinkable right now, but in order to meet their new guidelines and standards, the equipment has to be upgraded. So it was more of an equipment inspection and an inspection about how an operational side versus the actual portable drinking water. As I said, the health department does inspect it frequently to make sure that it's usable for the participants of the course.
And just, again, because I don't, is that, so they do it, they have a regular basis. It isn't voluntary like it might be on a residential house. This is commercial and therefore.
This is commercial. We're serving water to the public, the general public, so we have to meet a different standard. Yeah.
Thank you. And question, there was no real breakdown of numbers here. And, there's a pump and a control panel, and then I guess there's the filtration system.
Right.
Do you either have those numbers with you, or could you send them to Roland and then just to be included with our sheet on?
Yeah, I have a long list of breakdown numbers here, but I didn't include it in the applications.
So perhaps you could just give us a couple highlights now and then just send it to Roland for.
Yeah, I can send them to Roland. That's not a problem. I'll send them to him tomorrow, and he can distribute them. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Joe. So now I think we're ready.
Now, I'd like to make a motion to approve both PR1 and PR2.
Seconded. Is the motion stipulating whether it's
As routine.
as routine or non-routine?
I would say routine.
Which, of course, then our chairman makes that decision.
That's right.
I think in some cases you may not need this information, but, so
I'd second that.
So Leslie moved and Jeff second. And so I'll take a vote.
Aye.
All those in favor? 4-0? Zero?
On both.
On both,
Thank you.
since they were put together.
Thank you, Joe.
So the next item, I think, is, we don't have Mr.
I could handle it.
Simon, so you
Yeah,
can
this,
handle
we did this 11 months ago in February of last year when we got $2,870. This is covered by a budget resolution number 3. It's applied, someone in the first selectman's office applies for the grant. In this case, and last year, Drew Marzullo applied for it. The 2,000 came in. There's a copy of the check on the second page. And we deposited in the external entity account, the 440, which has a budget. And we covered that during the budget committee sessions. So you're basically, you're accepting this, and once it's accepted by the Board of Estimate and Taxation, it doesn't need to go to the RTM.
Is this something we should be doing? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, would you like to talk to that?
I'm sorry. I better be careful of the new chair. Is this something that we should be thinking about having in our standing resolutions? So we don't do this each time, or is this something that it's better that we deal with it each time? The acceptance, the ability to accept these grants. I mean, sometimes.
It is in the standing resolution,
Oh,
number
it
3.
is? So then, do we need to approve it if it's already?
Yeah, yeah, you're
We
accepting.
need to approve it, but they.
Oh, see,
it
oh, I
doesn't
see,
need to go to
upon
the
approval
RTM.
by the BOT, okay, I got you. All right, thank you, thank you.
So,
You've already had the cash and you've already deposited it. Just more like sequencing. We actually deposit the cash before we actually accept it by the budget committee and then the full BET.
This is, you're actually increasing the appropriation, what you're approving here. You're increasing the appropriation by the amount that came in, which they're allowed to do in the resolution. So you're not accepting the money, you're increasing the
Increasing the rest.
appropriation.
Okay.
so,
Just because it says, just to read the language though, it says that it's authorized to accept proceeds. So, okay. It doesn't,
and it says, and such proceeds shall become appropriations. That's the way our
Okay.
budget resolutions
Okay.
are generally written. And so if there needs to be discussion of that, then I think that is more appropriate perhaps in the law.
okay.
So I do have a question. Is this money, or perhaps you don't know, is it named for any special purpose? I mean, do we know if the town applied for this, or it's just something we get because it's part of a tax on our cable bills, or do we know any history of why we got $2,000 from them?
Drew made an application about a month ago.
Last year, we got over
Approve,
2,800.
got it.
Okay, great.
It's whatever's available.
Right, that's super, because I think the public really appreciates the television of our various and sundry town meetings, so anything we can get from revenue to help and support that effort, I think is very positive. So do we have a motion?
Make a
Deborah?
motion.
Who's
Mhm.
gonna make the motion? To
To accept,
accept approval to
approve the
use.
contribution to Channel 79.
So approval to use.
And I second that and propose that it be also routine.
So, those in favor?
Aye.
400. Okay. So I think we will now move to the finance, FI3, because Mr. Simons.
We're going to invite Maureen up, and we're going to move over here.
Getting away from
Very
Roland?
okay.
Getting away from Roland?
So are you?
Everybody knows Maureen Tracy?
No, I
Chief
think you
Accountant.
should introduce Maureen Tracy. I
Yeah.
believe this is Maureen's first visit to
Yes.
our table.
Actually, Maureen used to work directly for Roland Geiger, and she used to attend the all-day meetings of the Budget Committee, was promoted to Accounts Payable about 3 years ago, thereabouts. And she applied for and got the Chief Accountant's job. Maureen is a CPA, University of Pennsylvania, Masters?
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, but she's
But she's got a great resume.
Yeah, CPA in University of Pennsylvania. She's the project manager on this, and that's why I need her for a little of assistance. She did a little bit, she did a lot of work, and she generated some savings. This, back last year, we had a line item in the 130 account for last year's budget for this year's budget hearings for this year's budget of 2019, 2020. We had $500,000 in the BET line. 350 of it was earmarked for 4 projects. One of them was $50,000 for the Tyler Content Management, the invoicing and purchasing invoicing project. It's one of 2 projects in the finance department where our goal is to increase efficiencies town-wide. The other one is cash management, which Natasha is currently working on. And $50,000 was earmarked for this project. And the first thing is we had to do an investment assessment. We came to you in July of last summer and asked for $10,000. The investment assessment report was done. It was maybe 15 pages. There was a lot of recommendations. And actually, Maureen worked for 3 days with a number of people from the town, the Board of Education, the IT department, with Munis, Tyler Technologies, and they came up with a couple of recommendations, but the ones that are specific to the Tyler management, content management, TCM, required additional monies Now, if you go to the second page, you can see at the top where the release was $50,000. The language is there, you released 10, and we're coming for two pieces. We're coming to release the $40,000, and we're asking for an additional 40. It's not an appropriation, the money is already appropriated. So this is actually $40,000 release and $40,000 from the $500,000 account. One of the questions Deborah asked prior to the meeting is the license agreement for $60,000 is an upfront charge. Maureen, through her hard work, got the current year waived, which was $13,000. So that'll be a reduced amount going forward, so it's not $60,000 per year. There's also an email that was sent out about the next steps, and basically, I don't know if you have any additional questions. First of all, we have to install it. We have to, Finance Department becomes the trainers, and then we train the trainers going forward. One of the questions that came up prior to the meeting was the rollout, and Maureen and I talked about this. We haven't decided yet. Obviously, we can't roll it out and educate the whole town all at once. We decided to pick the heaviest users, the most sophisticated users, the ones that could pick it up the quickest, and probably the candidates would be Public Works.
Public Works, Board of Ed, Parks and Rec.
Yeah. So,
The heavy users.
yeah, I'll stop there, and just in case you have questions.
Leslie? Just to step back a little bit, only because I'm not as familiar with the specific implementation, what the goal of the project was. So if you could just very quickly, without going back to the beginning, but the investment assessment, that scope was to see whether a technology solution to our handling of invoices and payment of invoices could be implemented here? Is that really what that
Part
was
of it,
intended?
yes, that was part of it, but it was also looking at the whole way we use Munis, and to see if there's better ways, look at how we're using it, and to make recommendations as to how we can use it better and more efficiently also. So it was actually two things at that time, you know.
And this particular initiative then was kind of the highest priority coming out of that assessment, or the one you wanted to move forward with first, or are you moving forward on some of the other ones as well?
I would like to move out on some of them as well, but
Limited.
there's
resources.
limited time and
Yeah.
limited resources. But yes, there's a lot of things I would like to do, and they came up with some really good ideas, and we're looking into some of them. Some of them we could do quickly. I don't really need that much support from anybody, but the other things require, you know, time and testing before we do it.
Just if I could add to the assessment, as I stated before, there's two initiatives in finance. The other one doesn't require monies at this point. It's the one, this was the invoicing, the purchasing module upgrade, and the other one was cash management, which Natasha is working on. Actually, her predecessor, Kathleen Murphy, started it, and then she retired last February, and then we had a complete 100% turnover in the treasurer's department. The treasurer, the assistant to the treasurer, and the reconciliation and cash receipt clerk. So we had to wait till we stabilized with the staff. And that's actually, we had Munis here all day today. We're working on that project, but we're not here for monies. So that's the two initiatives that we're working on immediately as far as the assessment.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. And when we consider, we haven't acted on a budget for the finance department for fiscal '21 yet, I don't believe. As a
Next month,
BET, next month.
February.
I know historically we've sometimes done it earlier in the year, but I think part of that conversation, let's talk about the initiatives you have, make sure that, you know, you've got the capacity to execute them at the standard that you need to. You've got the resources to do that. But I think to put it into context, because I'm not sure we're all aware of everything that you're working on. So
Okay.
that would be helpful. But on this particular one, you've identified the opportunity. So this next phase, and you did give us some information about really the steps of the project. So the first is to upgrade our systems to be, and the capability to be able to move forward with this while you're developing the processes and the expectation, and then before a rollout. Is that correct? This next phase is really just to get the finance department ready to roll it out.
Well, the first phase is really just to implement TCM. So it's to actually, it's kind of a standalone system that integrates with Munis. So the first thing we want to do is get that installed and understand how to use it. The next step is to change some of the way things are processed in Munis. So we can take the Tyler Content Management System and automate the way that we're processing invoices. So the first thing is just the installation of the software and making sure it works properly. And the next thing is then figuring out, changing some rules and roles in Munis, and then rolling it out to the departments from there.
And am I correct, this will be a really silly question, but this is focusing on payables, on invoices? Because we talk
basically,
about
yes.
purchasing, but it's really.
It's not really, well, purchasing in the
tying it
sense,
to the
maybe
purchase order.
purchasing from a vendor specifically, but not really like purchasing going out to bids or something.
Okay.
Like that. It's not that, no.
Thank
Hi, thank you. Just a few questions. I just was thinking about this, the incremental money, but kind of where we stand in terms of generally consulting money within finance. I know we're also looking at some incremental money for Bloom to do some internal audit, so maybe you could talk a little bit about, where we stand from a capacity standpoint for consulting dollars in finance.
Okay. There's a couple of requests, not only here, but at the audit level. We had 500,000, and 350 of it was conditioned. We have the fire study going. The kickoff meeting is next week. We had the $152,000 for cyber defenses. The Bloom Shapiro is stalled, and let me come back to that. And then there's this piece here where we're asking for a total of $90,000. So we have an overage in the this area, but I spoke to the new finance officer, director, CFO at the Board of Ed, Sean O'Keefe, and they're resurrecting phase one of the Bloom Shapiro construction management project. Deborah and Leslie, you were liaisons to this project. Next week, Roland helped me with this conversation, and he assures us that he worked with Munis in Trumbull, Connecticut, that he does not need the second batch or tranche of money, which is $75,000. So there's a potential that we won't need that 75. There is $150,000 that's not earmarked for anything right now, other than the 40 that we're taking out of that 150. So there's potentially 110 and 75. We have a number of vacancies. There's the internal auditor vacancy for approximately 10, 11 months for the year. There is the accounts payable vacancy for 3 months. We just had another account clerk that was promoted and hired by the Board of Education, where there's a vacancy. We went through the hiring process. That's going to be filled September 10th. All of that adds up to about $100,000. So in the salaries, we have about $100,000, and then we have between $110,000 and $185,000 in your line item, the 130,490.
So with that, just talking about some of the other maybe recommendations that came out of part of this initial assessment, does it make sense, because there's always synergies when you're bringing on the software, maybe you're going through the workflow process, et cetera. Does it make sense to think about using some incremental consulting dollars to try to do some of it at the same time to make it easier on you and have third party actually assist in this process?
I'm not sure it is.
I don't quite understand the question.
I didn't understand the
So we have
question.
some extra money, potential
Right.
money left in consulting. You said that there were some other good ideas that came out of this initial assessment that they did. But you said you don't have the capacity really to do it. And so the question is, while you're going through this process of implementing the software and other procedures, does it make sense to maybe have them do some incremental work and pay a third-party vendor to do it at the same time? Would that work?
Okay, now I got the, our Our priorities are these two initiatives, the cash management and the Tyler Content Management. And the other, in the BET Audit Committee, I have to try to convince the Audit Committee to hire Bloom Shapiro for $100,000 to do 5 audits that were prioritized by the Audit Committee last year. So that's a priority. I don't know if I have any wiggle room after this increase in that $100,000 to try to expand on some of what Munis is offering. We could look at it potentially for the 2021 budget to see if we want to supplement the 51490 area. But it's a topic that we could take up in a couple of weeks when we're before you presenting our Finance Department budget.
Yeah, I just think going through and doing the full invoice processing, I think that there's a lot of potential efficiencies, workflow improvement, and so to try to do as much of it as you can early on. I think there's a pain period where you're actually doing the work and getting it done, but I think you'll start to see the benefit shortly thereafter. So I would just continue to support any effort to try to do that.
The only thing I was struggling over was the source of the funds. You said that you have funds that are available to you from unused payroll. You also said that there were some consulting funds, but your application before us doesn't identify the source. Shouldn't we be authorizing a transfer from one account to another?
No. It's all in the 51490. You see the blue sheet? The- We need $80,000 more. 40,000 of it is the balance on the 50,000 that was conditioned.
It's all in the same major object.
It's all, there's 150 beyond the 350 that was conditioned.
Okay,
So that's the second source of the second 40.
great. Yep, I'm good. Thank you.
Just related to that, this is more of a policy issue with the BET. I think we've made some of these issues more complex because we conditioned some of the consulting money, the 149 money, and didn't condition other parts of it. So it's unclear what approvals our controller needs to move forward with the use of some of those funds. I think if 149 is primarily used for the benefit of initiatives that the BET identifies it wants to move forward with, then perhaps the BET should just make an expectation that we should approve the use of any 149 money. We can talk about whether that's a problem for you or not in executing your role. But I think the way the blue sheet is written or the cover sheet here makes it more confusing than it needs to be. It's just because we condition part of the money but not all the money.
And I may have caused some of this confusion because originally the sheet came to us with an $80,000 release of conditions, and I asked the question, how can we release conditions of $80,000 if we only have $40,000 left? I think they tried to address that by having the second section saying authorization to use existing finance department funds. It should maybe say the consulting money funds or something like that. So maybe that one, would that help? Or just change that line prior to, so that it's clear it's from the consulting money, the other part of the $500,000 that they're using. It just that it wasn't a release of conditions as it was originally presented. So why don't we can talk about this internally and see if the sheet needs to be modestly adjusted for Monday? Is that okay? Yeah. I have one more request here, and Maureen, it was mentioned the detailed, very rapidly response to the questions that were raised this afternoon, mid-afternoon. Is there anything that you wrote in there that you feel that would be helpful to other BET members attending or the public as they're listening to this? there anything else that wasn't covered that you think is part of this that would be helpful for other people to know?
Maybe the
If not,
timeline,
if-
maybe the timeline of the project, which you covered in.
When you say the timeline, this is what I'm hoping will happen.
What's
I mean, I
expected this
definitely
year
do
and next
think
year?
that I will have the software installed. We've already talked to the people, to Tyler, we've already had like a kickoff meeting for installing the software. They're assuring me that it's so easy and so wonderful. Yes, I've heard that before. And it won't be that hard, but I'm really going to push to get that done by the end of the year. Rolling it out to the departments and changing the whole workflow. I think it can be done in a year. I hope so. I mean, I don't think it will be that complicated once we learn how to do it, but that's the only, saying it will be done in a year for the whole town, I don't know. I definitely think we will definitely have major departments working on it by the end of next fiscal year, definitely.
So that's great. I think, one of our goals is clearly to do things more efficiency, and also I think, implementing this kind of system, you're probably reducing risk of errors and so forth too, so that helps the process. Do we have any motions to approve this?
Make a motion to approve the release of conditions on $40,000 for,
And support the other 40,000?
And- if that needs to be part of the motion, and support the full expenditure.
And routine? Recommend routine? I second that.
Those support?
Oh, yes.
Okay. 400. So now we'll move on to our first item, which,
Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you.
thank you very much, Maureen and Pete.
All right, you're welcome.
Now we'll move on to our first item, which is Nathaniel Witherall, which we deferred until Larry Simon had another meeting at Nathaniel Witherall. So welcome, Larry. Your first BET meeting of the year.
Always a pleasure to be here. To see all of my friends sitting there in a row, lined up.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about why you're here for $230,000?
Yes, and I'm here for professional with an L at the end of professional fees. So as you know, we had the benefit of 4 years of intensive study on the of Nathaniel Witherall through HDG, and then the committee report. And one of the items that came out of the report, which I think was very helpful, was and now that we had Alan Brown retire at the end of December, we had our financial person retire at the end of December. So we are lacking a certain level of people at the top. And one of the recommendations of the report was to hire somebody from HGG and let them fill the job until we could permanently fill it. So we've employed somebody as of January 13th, who's just doing wonderfully. And I've been very happy with her, and she's been quite helpful to me and to the members of the staff in terms of helping us understand the clinical parts and the operations, and actually she's been quite a calming influence considering everything else going along there. That's very helpful. And so we request $150,000 representing up to 6 months of service. We are still looking to hire a permanent person and interviewing people. So if we don't fill the position, if we fill the position within the 3 months, we won't use all of this, but we're just providing ourselves a little margin to keep using their expertise. And this was facilitated, and I appreciate the services of the town administrator in negotiating this with me. The second item is HGG, surprisingly, offers the town a variety of consulting options. So we said we'll sign up for 1 month of consulting options or a certain number of hours where they give you, it's like a menu, and you can buy consulting services from different people in different areas for $30,000, up to $30,000. It could be helping with finance. It could be helping with PDPM implementation. They seem to think they can help in virtually everything we do, and I need to wait until Joanne, who's the administrator, gets a little more settled before we decide what we want to tackle next. The choices, there are many things to address at Witherall, as I've slowly but surely discovered there. That's item 2 for $30,000, which is consulting work, and they have certain areas of expertise that we don't have. An example being, as you know, we started PDPM October 1st, patient-driven payment method. We think we know what we're doing, but I think that they have, or Select Rehab has, a PDPM optimizer, and I'd like somebody to review how well we're doing on this. Are we coding things correctly? And although the dollar benefit has been positive in terms of more money per patient day, may not be making as much as we could be. And there's a lot of money to be left on the, I don't say left on the table, but I don't want to leave any money on the table. So I think, and then maybe they would say to us, you know, your dietary choices are not good. You need to have more variety, or your costs with the dietary are not great, or you should look to outsource these departments, or you should look to insource those departments. And I think they've been, despite the fact that they're in the Midwest and their sense of costs are not really realistic to the Northeast, I think that they understand how nursing homes work and different processes and procedures that we can use. And so I'm looking forward to taking advantage of their expertise in different areas. Next is $25,000 for the cyber risk assessment of our operations. And we've had somebody start this process, and now we need to have the money to finish the process, which will enable us to finish the risk assessment of Witherall. I'm a little weak in this area in terms of what they're actually doing, although people keep mentioning to me cybersecurity. And so if you ask me questions, I can't answer them. And last, due to the departure of Nathaniel Witherall's fiscal director, who has departed, the business service coordinator, Carmen Urfe, is leaving at the end of January. Now is a time to evaluate the business office procedures, including billing, accounting, and operational practices. We're planning to hire Tom Marion to help us write the correct entries from Matrix to Munis. It's clear we don't post revenue correctly. It's clear we don't post contractual allowances correctly. There may be other things we don't do correctly. And although they may be correct somewhat within Matrix, they're not correct within Munis. And that has a negative impact on the balance sheet that's in Munis, and I'm not sure it undermines people's confidence, but it should give them pause. And I think we've identified, at least we've identified the processes that occur, and we need to have someone come in who understands both Matrix and Munis and help us identify the accounting entries that have to occur. Would you like an example?
Sure.
I should ask Roland to give the
Just
example.
if you didn't say yes.
No, I'm ready for my example. So this apparently is what happens. So when we get money, people prepay. You know, everybody who comes to Witherall that's private sends in their money in advance. So by the end of January, we'll have sitting there several $100,000 of room and board for February. And the money is sitting in the town, and it just can't sit there. So there should be an entry that says prepaid revenue. And then when we bring it into room and board, it should be an entry that shows you that it goes from prepaid revenue to revenue. You can correct the entry, and that has to happen. We don't do that right. We have 11 years at least, or maybe longer, of archaic accounting entries. As a consequence of this, as one example, we have sitting on the books as a liability on Munis $1.384 million of prepaid revenue that doesn't exist. It's not a liability, and that will get reversed. So there are other accounts that we need to look at and clean up. The other issue that was to everyone's attention was when we bill Medicaid from people that were private pay, we were not sending through the contractual allowance adjustments to reduce the private pay revenue and increase the Medicaid revenue. We weren't doing either side of those transactions.
And they're not the same number.
The what?
And they're not the same number.
No, the private pay would be higher, the Medicaid revenue would be lower. Another error is the Medicaid comes in two parts, Medicaid patient portion and Medicaid revenue from the state. We weren't booking those separately and confusing everyone, including me. So I'm very anxious to start on this particular part of the project. I think that we need to finish the 2016 Medicaid audit. Roland can update you if you have other questions on that. Roland is the 941 expert. And you want to tell them what the 941 problem is? They should understand these issues. The state wants to make sure we paid Allen Brown, and they want to see.
And the way that the auditors for the state have traditionally done this is they take the salary expenses and tie them back to the 941, which is filed with the IRS. Since we have ADP, we don't file the 941s anymore.
They do.
They do. Now, they send us copies of it, but what they would like to see is the detail behind the 941s. So there may be a solution to this.
But these are the kind of questions you get from a Medicaid auditor. And considering that our costs are $400 a day and that we get paid $286 a day, you would think there would be some leniency here or some practical understanding, but we're working on that. And Tom Marins was helping us. And then he will do the Medicaid and Medicare cost reports, and he will help us finally with the crosswalks between making sure that we have in Munis all the correct accounts that he needs to produce the Medicaid and Medicare cost reports. And after he's finished with that, then he'll do item number 4.
So a couple of things. So the contract calls for a payment of $20,000 per month, but it also says plus direct expenses. You're asking on the salary side for 150, so I take it it's 120 plus 30 to cover the expected expenses that'll be part of the billing?
Yes. She wants to stay in a hotel or an Airbnb. She turned down my offer of the apartment we have in the administration building at Witherall.
Okay, all right. No, that's okay. I just want to
All
tie
right.
these elements up. I'll certainly support this item, and part of the solutions there are to be sure you have the funds you need to solve some of these problems. But while we're spending money on the substitute for Allen Brown, we have the money that we budgeted for Allen Brown's salary that are obviously not going to be spent. We also have a CFO. The CFO, I believe, was discharged at this point, so we're no longer salarying the CFO. Do I have that correctly?
Yes, for
Okay.
the moment.
So I have some unused salary dollars there, so at the end of this process, there'll be some reconciliation with us of how these funds were applied, because you'll have some salary dollars that you didn't need to spend while we were busy spending some money with HDG to fill in for the services that these departed members were providing, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. It troubles me. It troubled me, I think, even when I was at the time of my service on the recent strategic committee, that I have PKF O'Connor Davies working with us year to year. They've been with us for a long time. They came and did the accounting work on the study that we just did as a committee, but they've been in your shop as your outside accountants for a few years now. So it troubles me a bit that some of these things that are coming to light, you might have thought that maybe PKF O'Connor Davies would have been bringing them to light during the process of their work year to year with us.
That thought occurred to me also. I wondered how we could be audited for the last 11 years, or 12 years, or 13 years, and no one picking up on such fundamental problems. I don't know, you could characterize them differently, but this is like basic accounting that we're not doing right. Now, you could say to me, where have I been for the last 4 years?
No, no, no.
But,
My concern here was to see if it warranted your attention, and what you're saying to me, it's got your attention.
it should have gotten somebody else's attention before now. That was my own personal. I mean, it's really, I don't want to use the word appalling, but it is a little appalling that these problems could persist for so long without anybody noticing them.
Thank you. I have nothing else.
Yeah, a few things. So I know you don't have the answer for cyber, so I just, the only comment I would make is maybe for Monday's BET meeting. I know that a fair amount of the Witherall falls under the town cyber program, so I'm just kind of curious what the incremental money is, and maybe we could just ask
Oh,
Tom.
I can answer that question.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I asked Tom and I asked Megan. And you know what they both said to me? I have no money for you. Seriously, that was their answer.
Okay, I'm,
We
okay,
have money for the town, but we don't have money for Witherall.
okay.
Which question partly is what money will it require?
Yeah, I'm just not quite sure what it's doing versus what they're already working on. And that's more of a question maybe for Tom, and maybe what I'll do is follow up with him and Megan, and we'll get the answer.
We have hired somebody
Yeah,
who is doing work.
yeah, cyber defenses, yes. But
You probably know more about than I do.
But yeah, that's where it's a little confusing to me, because I know that Witherall is part of it. So I'm just trying to sort of reconcile in my mind what the increment, I'm not opposed to the money. I think that there's more money that needs to be done in this area. I'm just trying to understand specifically how this fits into the overall plan. But I think it's more of a
When you find out,
Well,
you'll tell me.
So-
Seriously.
So Deborah, when you work on this, will you make sure that you copy all of us? But my question that I would also like you to explore, if you're talking with Tom, or, obviously copying Larry too, while Larry is saying that they don't have money for Witherall, since they're doing it and managing it, is this what you're basically saying, Larry? Is it better that we consider this money for the IT department and, again, go through the process rather than putting it on the blue sheet for Nathaniel Witherall, so that it's in the right spot with the management?
I think that comes down to one of the questions that we're trying to figure out is, where does this sit? Is it a centralized function? Do we have a chief information security officer? Do we allocate out to the different departments, or do we have it sit in one place? I think that's part of what is being sort of considered right now. I don't know that we have an answer for that yet.
Well, but in the interim, while it would appear that Witherall doesn't have a lot of extra management that could handle this, as this is explored, the question you might ask is, in the interim, until that decision is made, I think we're all interested in supporting cyber. The best question is, how can this be best handled for Witherall and for the town?
And we also should be fair to the Witherall. Like, we shouldn't be having the Witherall being the only town department coming to us asking us for money, where maybe IT is asking for money for other departments. I think we just need to be, sort of fair in how we're doing this across the board, and not just with you. So I think we're all supportive of the spend.
I don't know if Peter knows more about who's paying for the cyber or not.
In the previous conversation, we had 150,000 earmarked for cybersecurity of the 350. We came and asked for 2,000 more. Cyber defenses would cost 152,000. It was led by the Cyber Security Task Force of Megan Zaneski, and Tom Klein. On the task force, and I attended some of the meetings, there was representatives from the police department, from Nathaniel Witherall, the library, and the Board of Education. Michael Ting, who you've seen come before the audit committee. There was a miscommunication. The Nathaniel Witherall picked up some of the recommendations from cyber defenses and went out and procured the services of a third party. And it costs approximately, whatever, 20,000, whatever you're asking for.
25.
Yeah. And they incurred this liability. The person responsible are no longer there. So what happened was, to Larry's point about Tom not wanting to pay for it, and we've ran out of the 152, we're coming before you to ask for this 25,000. The miscommunication was on the task force, the Nathaniel Witherall people, who were relatively new to the town, thought that the monies were covered by cyber defenses, which they potentially could have been paid for in the IT budget, but because they went outside the scope of the services and used another vendor, they didn't want to pay for it. So that's where we are with this 25,000.
Okay, and I also think we just need to be consistent with the vendors that we're using and making sure that the same testing and analysis is being done. So I'll follow, yeah, so I think I have a little bit more clarity on this, but I'm happy to follow up and try to get some more information prior to Monday's upcoming BET meeting. Thank you. So that was my one comment. I didn't think we'd have much of a conversation on that now. Sorry, I need my glasses. The other thing is, you talk about hiring somebody. I saw in the contract the possibility that we could actually hire the interim, that it kind of just lays out some language in there. I think it was on page 5 of the contract. Might we consider hiring the person that's there now as being?
We could, except,
Sorry,
well,
that's I probably.
I like her, but she's only interested in working part-time. Two, she only has a 1-month contract, it turns out, with HDG. They don't sign 3-month contracts. And, she's a very nice person, very knowledgeable. I think has really been a big help to me in the 6 days she's been there. But she's interested in doing 3-month interim jobs.
So they're out. So they're basically contracting out to fulfill this contract, and then they have
They
the
did
oversight
contract
over her. Okay,
Yes.
thank you. And
She
then
has a 1-hour conference call with them every Wednesday.
And then my last question is, using their expertise, they have a tremendous amount of expertise, having sat in some of the meetings and their presentations, and they came up with a whole host
who's
of
they?
HDG. And also PKF O'Connor had come up with recommendations on sort of the accounting finance side as well. And so my question is, some of this money that we're spending to get their expertise, you identified 2 areas just as an example, but there were also many other, kind of recommendations they made. Will this interim, will she be looking at some of those recommendations and trying to implement them as well?
Well, one of the ones is, the first thing we're going to look at is nurse staffing levels. Are we overstaffed? What should be the best staffing level? How do we better use part-time people? She's an RN. She's an experienced nurse administrator. Ed Omondi came back to work today for the next 5 days before he goes on vacation. That's just a rhetorical aside. And and the point being that, it's dangerous talking to this group. It's the only place I've ever been where everybody thinks we have a problem and nobody solves the problem. So everybody thinks we have too many people on the day shift, but why do we have too many people on the day shift? At least with her, I'm going to be able to get to the bottom of these answers. If she needs help from HDG to give her more analysis or more models, she can do that. She'll have those resources available to her. What I don't want to do is bring somebody in just to bring somebody in to Witherall and say, well, you need to do this, you need to do that. I want to have them focused on specific problems that we can identify and fix. And we only have a limited capacity at the moment to fix anything. So as we keep moving along, week by week, we're going to tackle different problems. The first is going to be nursing overtime, the second is going to be nursing staffing, the third is going to be use of part-time, fourth is going to be more innovative use of part-time. Should we be having people work 12-hour shifts on the weekend that are part-time? And I'd like to see how well we progress rather than give her projects to work on and get none of them done. I don't find that to be very effective.
I agree with that, but there's also these other sort of recommendations that are out there that at some point they'll get addressed as well.
We just go right down the path. And I don't have a CFO, and I have to decide how to hire a CFO, having now failed 3 times in a row. I think I should take myself out of the interview process. I'll put you in charge of the interview process. Although the last one was brilliant, but a little.
Yeah,
I'm not going to say anything else.
So and then just the last thing, Tom, Marion coming in and helping you with some consulting as well. I just want to make sure, if they're looking at sort of some of the payables and invoicing and things like that, and I'm not sure when you kind of mentioned.
He's not going to do that.
Okay, because I want to make sure anything that he does to the extent that what they're working on finance, that it gets coordinated and we just make sure.
He is going to help with one specific set of problems, two problems. One is all the transactions, all the accounting transactions that occur in Matrix get properly journaled to Munis. He's going to look at the accounts that are on Munis, like the one we mentioned for the 1.384. He's going to say this doesn't exist and you should get rid of it. And then the last thing we're planning to do is bring the two ARs into reconciliation. What we have at Witherall and what we have on Munis should in fact be the same.
Yes.
We're going to set up another account called Medicaid Patient Portion, which will help us understand why our Medicaid payments are too low and why our private pays are too low, because we've been categorizing the applied income for Medicaid patients as private pay, and that just distorts everything. And those are the kind of things that I want him to focus on so that we have better reporting and better accountability.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just want to say that I'm supportive of the application. I know that with the retirement of the executive director, with the issues with the finance director, you had a gap in management. I think the use of HDG coming in on an interim basis to fill that gap was really a very good step. It'll help right the ship. I think there are different objectives that you could have used with this interim director. One is just, not to use a terrible term, but to babysit, to keep just things going. But I hear that you're also using this individual to improve some of the key areas and take an outsider's view of trying to change the way that it's been, resources have been allocated to improve the operations and the expenses and the flow. So I think that that's a good thing.
I just want to add, she also will improve our clinical care. I think she has a much better sense of the right protocols to use and an outsider's perspective.
That's also a good addition. I know that it's a 3-month agreement. You've asked, and there's been some conversation of whether it should be 3-month or 6-month. It makes sense to me to ask for the 6 months. You won't use it if you don't need it. It depends on what the applicant pool is and what the right timing is for bringing in a permanent executive director. But I'm supportive of the longer term. On the consulting funds, again, also a good idea to give resources to help the interim address specific issues and to research them. Question about that: are you obligated to spend the $30,000, or is it just an available source of funds as to use up to that cap if needed? I should have read the contract more carefully. I guess I should have, but.
Well, it's not clear. I think I committed myself to spending the $30,000, although they're going to be hard pressed to bill me for things I don't use.
Okay.
I thought when I talked with Ben, he said that we were actually only committed to 1 month of consulting. He was very clear, whereas we were committed in terms of the contract to 3 months of the HDG
so-
directorship.
Well, that was.
I mean, you may have projects that exceed 1 month, but it's my understanding that the document itself is perhaps written differently.
No, I think you're right. I don't know that I'm committed to a 30-day period. I'm committed to a certain amount of money that I have to spend. But, it's just the way it's going to work. I can find uses of their time, and you saw that how much they're getting paid, so it doesn't last forever.
And the one last comment I wanted to make is I know that there's a lot of attention now on the longer-term issues for Nathaniel Witherall. And I'm hoping that the conversation about this additional appropriation doesn't get so mixed up with that. We have a short-term problem, and then we have other issues that we're addressing. And so I'm hoping that we'll get support for this interim appropriation.
All right.
No, I don't. I was going
No, I'm good.
to move the item, but propose it be non-routine.
So I just want to ask a question here. This originally came to the Budget Committee, I think, as $140,000. And, I think it makes a lot of sense to extend the period for 6 months. But as you point out, if we don't have the HDG director there, you find someone to manage whatever. But do you think, you've been on the Budget Committee too, that we should be conditioning, say, the 3 months. This, again, we've gone out and hired, it hasn't gone yet through the RTM. I mean, is there a balance here to say condition it and release it in March? And,
Here's
at least
here's
have.
what we're going to do. When we get to June, we'll do a reconciliation. I don't know that I'm going to have enough money, even with this money, to make it through the whole year with all my expenses. And you can condition it, but I think I think Jeff's idea to reconcile, provide a reconciliation and see where we are in June is a better one. That would be my preference.
I think to do conditions just brings it back to the conversation over and over again. I think it just takes Larry's time. I would just assume keep it as simple as that would be my preference.
So we'll be seeing Larry on February 7th anyway, won't we, Larry?
Well, that was my question, is whether you set aside a time for me to come.
Yeah. 9 o'clock on Roland, I thought you had sent out the 9 o'clock on the 5th of February.
On the what
On the
day?
7th of February. It's
Yeah,
day
fifth-
5.
it's
which
fifth
is
day.
Saturday.
Yes.
You're right,
What day of the week is that?
It's a
Friday.
Friday.
The 7th?
Yes.
It's the 7th, it's a Friday.
I'll be back.
And we look forward to seeing you. So I would.
Oh, so people are going to be working in the interim, Larry? You're going out someplace fun?
I am going away on vacation.
Good, great.
I would move this item, but perhaps call it non-routine.
And the only thing I would say is I'm in favor of it, but I do need a little bit more clarity on the cyber piece of it.
But you're going to seek clarity
I'm
from
going
others.
to seek clarity from others, but I am supportive of this. But
Are
I
you
just,
seconding that? or
sure,
Leslie?
well, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. Happy to second. Happy to let Leslie second.
Deborah, second. And
Aye.
those in favor?
Aye.
400.
Thank you, Larry.
Non-routine, definitely, because we need more information.
Well, what do you want? I'm not
No,
coming
Deborah's
back.
going to get some.
Deborah's going.
I volunteered to have
On
some
the
conversations
cyber.
on this, yes.
So,
And also, I think you should coordinate with Larry on the cyber, because he provided, after that conversation started, additional information that we didn't get
All of us,
initially.
with Larry,
but-
with Tom,
but-
with
all right, but
Megan.
just to keep, what time's your meeting start on Monday? 6:30.
6:30.
And I have my board meeting from 5:30 to 7.
So maybe it's a
So I'm-
Work it out
discussion
with
to
the
make
chairman.
So I could be here at 7:15, because I certainly don't want to miss the report.
We have eight BET members present. My thought with doing it non-routine was to give the other 4 a chance to ask questions, but if that was Larry, if they're going to ask questions, they have to ask questions of somebody. And so I think I put Larry in a box for that. Maybe that was not so well
I
advised.
can't be here before 7:15.
We'll leave this up to our chairman, but I would hope that Larry would be there at the time this was discussed, and I would hope that Deborah would be back with some information, so give the BET members a chance, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, right? Right. Okay, so thank you, Larry, for coming.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
And the others who attended, who are on our special committee for Nathaniel Weatherall. Appreciated that. So we'll move on to old business, of which we have none, and new business. I'm sorry?
I didn't catch the vote on the last.
400.
Okay, 4-0.
And then we'll move on to new business, discussion of economic conditions. Roland, thank you for putting together the report. I think it's good to begin to look at these things. This is 6 months of our fiscal year as we begin to contemplate very shortly, later this week, our budget for next year. So would you like to run through this, Roland?
On the revenues, the conveyance and the building permits seems to be slowing down from the beginning of the year compared to last year. You can see that the building permits in particular, $200,000, and it's been quite a bit more than that. Seasonally, it wasn't that way a year ago. And the same thing with the conveyance tax. Those revenues also slowing down.
But we're running ahead, on the conveyance tax, we're running ahead of last year.
No,
They're probably running ahead of the average. I didn't do the math, but it's probably running ahead of the average of the 3 preceding years.
Well, no, actually, we're down 3%. I did do the math.
Oh, okay.
We're down 3%, if you're just talking about the 6 months versus 6 months.
Yeah, that's
Now,
exactly what I'm talking about.
On conveyance, we're down 3%.
When you run this chart in the future, can you pull a subtotal where the actual ends?
I know, I had to pull it in.
And how that, and how that subtotal, compares to prior years, is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
I did
so
it.
we get the subtotal prior
did a
year,
little-
maybe the
Yeah.
percent of the
Yeah.
total year, which
Yeah.
just helps us easier to
Excel
understand the status.
Great. Thank you.
And I just, because it'll probably be Jeff's next question, I did the same thing on building permits, again, following on from your comments.
Yeah.
I think on building permits, we're down 7.4% year over year.
See, so we're running a little over.
But I think because we have conservatively budgeted road, and we should add this, we are actually at or ahead of budget, as long as we don't have any performance that's deteriorated from the kind of performance. We will meet our budget for both conveyance and building permits. Interest, though, we're doing much better, right, Nolan?
It's a crappy little number,
Can I, this is related but not exactly on the topic, but for the upcoming budget meetings, can we have a year-to-date or 6 months of all the revenue lines compared to prior year? Just so we know where we are on ECS and excess cost and and pilot funds, anything else that we've got. It just helps us understand what's being proposed.
That'd be great. Super. And Roland, do you want to tell us about town departments?
Running at the same rate as last year. The biggest variances are the ones where we had a timing issue in terms of when we made the payments. For example, GEMS, we paid it in December one year, we paid it in January the other year. Pupil transportation is, those payments are kind of lumpy to the service provider. I'm not quite sure how they're paid, but they seem to stack up, and a lot of money's paid at once. It's not a smooth
That's busing.
busing, yeah.
Mhm.
It's not a smooth monthly schedule of payments.
Oh, wow, I was hoping it was a better route system between public and private schools or something.
The one that's kind of out there is the Board of Ed Instruction, and you've heard the discussion about special ed costs,
Yeah.
and it's kind of what we're seeing right there.
I think also police department.
Yeah, the uniform.
It's really, it's well over $500,000 when you combine two departments.
Do you know what's causing that? Is it a pay period difference, or?
No, the pay periods are all the same this year versus last year. I'd have to look at that.
Overtime or something. If you could check that one out, Roland, that would be helpful. But we'll have lots more time to talk about these things. But anyway, thank you for putting it together. I think it's really good to have this.
Can I just
Yes.
confer, I might know the answer?
Oh, yes.
Was the retro for the police contract a year ago paid after?
And that-
I think the difference might be when the retro was applied. It was settled in October.
Paid in,
So that might be the answer, is when the retro was paid last year.
Okay.
That's right, we didn't have the contract in the first 6 months of last year. That could be a part of it.
okay.
Okay, great.
That'd be a good answer. I'd like
Mhm.
that.
I did have one question. Healthcare, in 901, you have the healthcare's higher, 2.9. Is there?
That's a timing issue.
That's timing?
So thank you. I think this gives us a good base as we begin our budget.
Oh, no.
Oh.
Yeah, healthcare is a timing issue.
You any more questions? Anyone?
No, all mine were addressed. Thank you.
So I think we'll move on. So again, with the thought that we're beginning our budget presentations and listening to the public later this week, one of the things that I was very impressed about was our credit rating presentation this year and the reaction of the rating agencies people. We had several of the people that are in the room tonight actually participated. Andy and Leslie, Jeff, Miriam, and me. Is that right? Anyway, it was very impressive. I also spoke to Leslie about this. We thought it would be great if Pete could just run through, not necessarily with any questions from all of us, but if he could run through this presentation, because it shows how all working together, different committees, everything we do, we labor over things, and we talk about Witherall and the issues, and we do worry about these. But it all comes together, and we have a great staff in Pete and Roland and Lauren, who's working on our revenue stream, and all the others, Maureen and the rest of the team. But it came together, and I thought it would be helpful to all of us if we sort of ran through that. And Pete, you want to give us the presentation?
You want to come over here?
We can come there, and so we don't have our back to you for a few minutes, and
I'm good. I can say.
like that opportunity.
There's hard copies if anybody wants a rating or the presentation.
Are we in your way if we just stay here?
No.
No.
It's just that you have to. We had the rating presentation done on December 30th, but there's a lot of work that goes into the presentation before December 30th. The work starts in November of each year. The financial advisor contacts me, and between the two of us, we start to put together the official statement. The official statement has a lot of information that comes from a lot of different departments. I have the Board of Ed, Public Works, the building inspector, assessor, et cetera. And we start to build the official statement. And the next step is I need to have a finished CAFR so that I could have current audited numbers in the official statement. The BET, by policy, approves the CAFR each December so that we're able to dump the short form into the official statement. And the preliminary official statement called the POS is sent to the credit rating agencies. And what they do is they actually go through completely the OS, the CAFR, and they come up with a number of questions. And it's a lot of the preliminary work that makes the presentation easier. There's three major credit rating agencies that are out there. There's Moody's, there's S&P, and then there's Fitch. We stopped using Fitch in 2017. We used them through 2016. The BET decided that it was cost-effective to have only 2 credit reviews instead of 3. There was a little bit of resistance before that, and it didn't initially, the BET didn't initially ask for the change until officially 2017. Credit rating agencies, all the costs that go into a financing amount to about $150,000. The bond counsel, Robinson Cole, cost about $50,000. And then the 3 credit rating agencies, if we still use Fitch, are between $35,000 and about $41,000 each. They rate the bonds and they rate the bands separately. So if you could move that to the next one. What we do each year is traditionally we invite the first selectman and town administrator, and Fred participated in it with Ben. And in the past, you're good. Peter Tessie would come in, and he would, if you go to the next page on the initiatives, he would at this point present some of his initiatives. In the past, he talked about some of the surveys that he did biannually every 2 years, why he started the surveys, their satisfaction surveys. He talked about access Greenwich, and a couple of other, a big one was the healthcare. He would talk about what the hot topics were each year between the first selectman's office and the finance department. If you go back one to number 3. Now, these are the topics. Now, each Moody's and S&P have scorecard methodologies, and they review and rate the different areas: management, economic factors, financial operations, and debt management. And they assign weights to each of these. For Moody's, the management is 20%, economic is 30%, the financial operations are 30%, and the debt management is 20% as far as weight. And within that 4 categories, they have, Moody's has 13 subcategories. They could be up to 10%, either 10% or 5%. Examples would be, how big is your grand list? How much liquidity do you have? How big is your fund balance? How about the wealth indicators, the top employers and taxpayers? And there's 13 categories. The S&P on this has the same 4 categories, but they divide them into 7 subcategories, and they also have a scorecard. And for each of these 4 categories, we have been rated very strong in all of these areas. So if you can go to 5. I'm sorry, go back to 4. Now, one of the things is in the recent initiatives, aside from looking at the CAFR and looking at the official statement, they also, as an example, S&P read the budget guidelines. And because they read the budget guidelines, they come up with a number of questions prior to the rating presentation. And they wanted to know what we were doing about cybersecurity, construction management, and a couple of the other areas that I'll touch on later. So during the presentation, we got into cybersecurity. Some of the conversation that you heard this evening, where we have an existing task force, where we have a collaborative effort between people that report to the Office of the First Selectman and the finance, meaning the risk manager and the IT, got together and we put together this task force with oversight for the BET Audit Committee. And we told them about that. And we told them about how cybersecurity has been on our radar for a number of years. We've got insurance policies going back maybe 4 or 5 years where the insurance companies send us very elaborate, sophisticated, time-consuming surveys and questionnaires on what we're doing about cybersecurity. So that's nothing particularly new, other than we've enhanced it. And for example, with cybersecurity, we're looking at the concept of a CISO, where you have what do you call it, information security officer, which we don't currently have. We have a very dedicated, educated, sophisticated information officer in the IT department, but we're looking for somebody with this certain type of security. That's the type of conversations that we have with the agencies. One of the comments was, you're out ahead of it compared to some of our peers. Construction management, one of the reasons they singled that out, and we talked about it, was a year ago, the CIP had $807 million in it over the 15 years CIP period. It went up to $1.6 billion, a dramatic increase. And some of the areas and the concerns that were outlined in the budget guidelines by the BEC, for example, is, do we have the capacity to properly manage our construction projects? And the answer is, we felt we were short, and that's why we went out starting in 18, carrying into 19, the Bloom-Shapiro people. We talk about Nathaniel Witherall a little bit at this point, and I'll talk because it's got its own slide. And for example, we invited Ben in to talk a little bit about Six Sigma. He has some comments, and he'll also talk about Six Sigma during the budget committee hearings next month. He's going to have another batch. Roland, myself, a lot of the department heads have already been trained on Six Sigma. So it's a very active and productive program. And then we mentioned that the police defined benefit plan was closed, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Next, one of the categories, again, all of these 4 categories were strong, very strongly rated. It's good that there's a good working relationship between the staff and management. And it goes back, for example, with the debt in the fund balance policies where the financial advisor, Bill Lindsay, and I came to the audit committee and said that we need a debt and fund balance policy because now all of a sudden we have a positive fund balance where we had a negative one with the pay-as-you-go. Again, we've had these from 11, and I'll tell them that every 2 years they're looked at, and then they're tweaked, and then sometimes you have changes. It's great to have conservative budgeting practices, which are reflected in the surpluses that we have. Like, for example, 9 out of the 10 years, there's a slide that talks about it. They like to see that we have 10-year operating budget projections and 15-year operating CIP projections. Now, a couple of comments about why do we do 10 and why did we do 15? In order to do 10, it's great that you can try to project out 10 years, but you need certain assumptions if you're going to try to go out 10 years with an operating. For example, in the 10-year one that I just updated for the credit rating agencies, we'll put in assumptions like 2% operating increases in salaries. We'll put in, for example, the 10% for the health care based on what the state partnership plan is telling us, and then the second year is 12. The problem with 10-year revenue and expense projections are things that could happen that could dramatically affect them. And I'll give you 2 specific examples that really blew the 10-year budget projections out of the water, but we adapted real quick. It was the financial meltdown in 7-8. We had in there revenue projections that were very large for conveyance tax, interest income, and building permit, which you just went over. And we review monthly when we get about 6 months in. The projections for the revenues were blown out of the water because in the first year we lost $10 million, and they ratcheted it down dramatically, so it affects the 10-year budget. Another example is when we went to the state partnership with the health care, we had tens of millions of dollars of savings. So it's dangerous to try to go out 10 years with a projection because something dramatic can come that could totally skew the out years. However, you can adapt very simple, and then you restart. And then the 10-year projections, with them 2 exceptions, have been pretty close to very accurate. 15-year CIPs, nobody does 15 years. It's rare to see any of our peer communities go out more than 5 years. We do 15, I think, Roland, used to do 10 at one point. It was 5. 5 at one point, went to 10. So the value really is trying to be accurate in the front 5 years. As I said before, in the 15-year CIP, you've got $1.7 billion of capital requests. I don't think we have the ability to spend $1.7 billion in the next 15 years because you'll see when we go into the budget hearings next month, one of the complaints the BET always has with the departments is you're not spending. Even now the BOC is jumping on the same bandwagon. In their letter they're saying you've got over $100 million that's not spent on there. That reflects on trying to plan for 15 years. And then bottom, why so strong? Because we have all these things, these policies and these projections, they rate us high, and therefore we're AAA in this area, very strong. Next is, again, strongly rated. Largest grant list means that we have the ability to pay. We're way ahead of number 2, Stanford, and number 3, Norwalk. This is one of the metrics that stands out. We're way ahead of other communities with the size of our grant list. In going back to S&P and some of the questions they had, for example, you have a revaluation coming up, And what they'll do is are there any cases out there that can impair or affect the financial statements? You get a monthly report from Lauren Elliott. I took the liberty of stealing her December report, and I used it, and I gave them statistics on what was still outstanding from the October 1st, 2015, and all the great work that Lauren and Jean McLaughlin have done settling all the revaluation cases. One of the questions we couldn't come up with was the impact of SALT, the state and local taxes, and the impact on people who lost that deduction on their taxes, and what it may have on the revaluation or the values of homes. I sat down with Lauren, and I repeated this to the credit rating agencies. We'll probably know, and she's picking April, he says, if SALT has any impact on the revaluation and the values of properties in town. You go to the next. Diversity. One of the strong points is that we have a very diverse tax base as far as the top taxpayers. You've got there, the top 10 represent about 3% of the tax levy. Why is that important? For us, it's a AAA rating, very strong in this area. There are some areas, if you go out west, you go down south, where you have a small town or a medium-sized town where they might have a very large automobile plant, or they're tied to the coal industry, or they're tied to an employer that dominates the grand list, and there's always the potential of a depression, a recession, or whatever, or they just simply move, that it could impair the financial statements. So when we tell them that we are not affected by taxpayers coming in or going out dramatically, it's good for the report card, the scorecard. And we basically, we don't have that many changes from year to year. I think the last major employer, or not employer, was the Greenwich Capital Group that was down on Steamboat Row when they moved out a number of years ago. But then they were simply replaced by, I think the firm is called GRC, or I can't remember if that's the landlord, or RDS is the employee. So diversity is a good thing in the tax base. Go to the next. We're consistent with our tax collections. If you look, and then when we go to the next slide, you'll see across the line, and we can wait for the next slide, we average collections of over 10 years, 99.3. Why is that number important? When you go to Roland's mill rate page and you look at the uncollectible, we have to true up the levy so that we collect 100% of the revenues to support the budget. And what we do is we factor in an uncollectible. So if you could go into one of the cells in his mill rate calculation, you'll see that we have an uncollectible of 0.65. And we collect, we're going to guess that we're going to collect 99.3%, but it's really 99.35. So that's where we come up with the uncollectible piece. And then we took the liberty to talk about Howard Richmond's tax collection program and what he was doing in that area there. And it was just educational for the credit rating agencies. However, it spilled over into the press, where you had dueling tax collectors running for office. And if you read the paper, I think it was today, where one of the programs, the prior tax collection, was discontinued. There's the argument, and Andy knows this argument because of the email traffic, where do you leave it on the books, collect an 18% interest, or do you take it into the Treasury and only collect 1 or 2%? So there's the pros and cons of the tax collection program. It's interesting to talk about it with the credit rating agencies. And then if you go to the next slide, you just simply see where we've got, you can see the 99.3, where we come up with the uncollectible. And when you're collecting over 100%, you're just factoring in the prior year collections to get to over the 100%. Then if you go to the next slide, basically we General fund, on a GAAP basis, we had a surplus of 2.8, budgetary 5.5. Basically, it's the way you treat, the difference between the two is, and there's a reconciliation, it's in the way we treat encumbrances. That third bullet, sub-bullet, is huge. In the beginning, when we were using fund balance to the tune of 10, 11, and $12 million, one year we used $19 million when we gave an extra 5.3 to Nathaniel Witherall. Years ago, they would question us, and they would say, can you replenish that? Can you replenish it? And year after year, we've replenished it. And we have demonstrated, so that's not even an issue anymore about using that much of fund balance. And then, if you go to the next slide, you could see one of the things they like for us to do is to drill down, and they like to analyze the revenue, the variances that are positive and negative. And what we do is we drill down for them, and this is on a budgetary basis, and we'll tell them that, we had very favorable property tax collections because of the enhancement in the tax collectors program. We had good building permit numbers, I think about 256 surplus there. There's the Treasury. We're very conservative budgeting. We had a $2 million, 2.1 surplus in the interest income line. That's the use of money. One of the noted in the credit reviews where we no longer rely on the state, and we don't budget formerly the ECS, the education cost sharing, the SPED, the special education reimbursements, the bridge revenues, the pilot revenues for the Greenwich Hospital, and that turned into last year where surprise number one was a few years ago, they took it away from us, and I'll point to that in another slide, the impact of it. We took away the budgeting of it, and we ended up with a 4.5 surplus in the intergovernmental area. Other revenues could be surpluses in encumbrances, and the expenditure line items are basically, a lot of the surpluses in the different categories are surpluses in salaries because we budget 100%. We had good surpluses in the fixed charges in the health care and in the workers' compensation. The workers' compensation, we report good news to the HR committee monthly for the last 2 or 3 years. This is a compressed statement, so the 8.4 million surplus, the variance, is really misleading because it doesn't show the offset of variances, the negative 4.3. So the two combined, the surplus was really about 4.4 million, but it translated down to the budgetary where the surplus now is up at 58 million versus the 62.8 on a GAAP basis, and there's the 5.5, the components of the surplus on a budgetary basis. Nobody wants, do I have to need to stop for questions or anything? Or just wait till the end, okay. Next one. Again, this points out, it's a repeat of the fund balance, is the flexibility. A number of years ago, when we had the negative fund balance in the general fund, we had to point out that we had other reserves that we could reach out to. The CNR is the capital non-recurring, which is, we were up to around $10 million there. Perfect example is today there was a flood in the high school, and they're probably going to come to you and ask for some money in the next month to pay for the flood at the MESA area, the performing arts area. And this is an example where we have the ability to reach out and come and get from the CNR, the capital non-recurring, monies to pay for these emergencies. Last year we had 4 of them. There was the 2 at the high school, there was Coscob, and there was Hamilton Avenue. Ironic that it's almost the same conditions that are happening where you have cold weather and you have these things repeating, but we have the ability to deal with immediately without hesitation reaching out for monies in this fund here. So we have additional reserves. When we had the superstorm, And Joe Siciliano needed $3 or $4 million for the beaches in the parks where the sand was eroded, the piers were destroyed. We reached out, and this fund, the CNR fund, gets replenished through insurance reimbursements, FEMA reimbursements, and closing out the taxable capital projects. The Risk Reserve Fund used to be a healthy little fund with $3 million in it, and what happened was we had a series of big losses in the settlements over the last year and a half, and it depleted it, and we had to appropriate an additional $3 million this year, and that 6.43 was replenished with $3 million. But it'll continue to be a discussion item for the Budget Committee. And basically, when it was $3 million and when the CNR was 10, it looked good when we didn't have much in the general fund. And there'll be a slide that shows how good the general fund has been going over the last 10 years. If you go, oh, and one more, another bonus is liquidity. They're big on cash. S&P is very big on cash liquidity. And you can see on the bottom where we had unrestricted cash of 120. That's general fund plus other funds. Next, please. Again, this is the 9 out of 10 years we had surpluses in the fund balances. If you look at 2017, and you can see that little dip, the 1 year, that was a direct result of the state of Connecticut dramatically cutting us back on our budgeted revenues in the area of education cost sharing, SPED reimbursements, and the pilot from the hospital and the housing authority reimbursements. Next slide. Nathaniel Witherall, what surprised me the most during the presentation was no concern either from the credit rating agencies or during the audit from RSM US LLP about this large operating deficit. Now, I don't have to educate anybody in this room because you all got your arms around this problem. Mike Mason in March of 2016, in response to the first deficit of about, in 2015-16, of about $5 million, we simply funded it and it went away. The management comment went away from the auditors, and the credit review people heard what we said, and a year later it was gone, and were satisfied. So here we are again, and we're in the same boat as far as an operating deficit. But where my surprise was is they didn't drill down and ask specific questions, other than the fact that we're proactive. Going back to Michael Mason in March, he created the first strategic planning committee, and then when Jill came in and continued the work of the first one, the first things the strategic planning committee went out and did was hired Health Dimensions Group and the PKF O'Connor Davies, which we've been discussing month in and month out, and which will be on the agenda as far as the results of all this work over the last 2 years, the production of the Nathaniel Witherall report. That'll be was our first read in December and be acted upon in some way as far as acceptance Monday night, hopefully. And then going back to the next one. Again, this is just simply the current year the components of the 1920 budget. It's 4.9% increase. The mill rate's 2.75. 15.3. They want to know what are the drivers of a 15.3. The first piece is the ordinary expense of 5. About $5 million of it is driven by contracts and the salaries. And then you go to the fixed charges, and the components that drive the increases are the same usual suspects. In this case, for this year, it was 2.58 pension increase in the DB plan. You had the $1 million spike in the insurance policies. You had a $2 million spike in the risk fund, where we went from $1 million to $3 million. The debt service went up $2 million. So they're the most common drivers, with the exception of the insurance spike that was once the first time in 10 years, that drive the fixed charges. And then they just simply they look at the components that go into the 1920, and I just did. I'll just explain to them what the drivers are. And you have the next. Here we go. I talked about this. This is the where we appropriate the 15.3. 3 million of is the risk reserve replenishment. The 3 million is part of the. It's not the use of fund balance where the 15.3 is, but the 3 million in the Nathaniel Witherall is the tax part. And then, as I said earlier, we replenish that annually. I'll give them an update 6 months into the year, and the comments that I made were that 6 months in, the revenues are trending well as far as budget. And my guess after 6 months is that we would, if you take that $2.8 million, if we trended the same as last year, I would erase the 2.8 with the $3 million additional use of fund balance, and I'm predicted break even for the current year for the 1920 operations. Next. And then these are yours. I don't have to repeat these. These are the budget guidelines. Actually, we should have inserted BET before budget guidelines. You go to the next one. They like to know what's in there, and we talk about the big projects. In that $40 million, 4 of it was the trunk radio system. A little over $9 million was New Lebanon piece. There's the $4 million, I believe it was, for the paving, $3 million for the Binney, and a couple million for the Sound Beach. 22 and change of the 40 million was then 5 projects there. And then the 50 million, over 22 million of that is the Board of Education. We traditionally give them, notwithstanding projects like New Lab, Hamilton Avenue, or Glenville, over $10 million for infrastructure, and then 8 million of that is 2 years of paving. And they really, what they want to know is what's on the horizon for bonding for the next 2 years, and the bands explain that. Go to the next. We have good metrics comparison. There's there's 17 AAAs, Moody AAAs in the state of Connecticut. They like to measure us against our peers. Debt burden is just the product of 62,000 people divided into the largest grand list in the state of Connecticut. We have low to moderate debt. Our net direct debt is, it was I think 222 last year, and it's about 211 minus. It nets out the revenues from North Mianus and Millbrook. Good metrics in that area as far as moderate debt. And the big conversational piece is the future debt, where the consultants for the Board of Ed came up with this master plan to spend about $900 million over the next 15 years. If you go to the next. The union contracts, these were the 5 contracts that were outstanding at June 30th. The middle bullet was settled. It was a little strange that it didn't go to the normal process. 2 of the steps that take place in the settlement of contracts is, number 1, I certify the cost. I didn't certify the cost for the LIUNA professionals. It didn't come before me. And number 2, it goes to the RTM. Sometimes they vote up, sometimes they vote down. This one was actually settled by the Board of Education, so that's basically been ratified. We adjusted for that, and we noted it in the official statement that the middle one is actually a current union contract. And we're fully insured as far as health care, and the self-insured with workers' comp and heart and hypertension. Next. We're doing well. We're not 100% funded with the DB plan. It's been closed to everybody but the fire. The police closed it January 1st of 19. We're 80% funded. Our net pension liability is $125 million at June 30th of last year. By charter, we have to pay 100% of the actuarially determined employer contribution. And then one of the highlights of the 2.58, there was two pieces that were major, is we reduced the discount rate last year from 6.75 to 6.5, and then there was an impact of about $800,000 of that increase on the COLA for current police members. Next. OPEB. OPEB is a good news story. We were 40% funded a year ago, and we jumped to 50%. We had a good year return-wise. The net pension obligation is $57 million, and obviously, if you do the math, we've got assets of about $27 million to come up to that number. By policy, the charter didn't recognize OPEB in the 1940s when they wrote in the charter requirement to fully fund the DB plan. The BET came along. OPEB became a trust I think it was 2007, January 1st of, 8. And as a result, the BET decided to mimic the charter requirement, and the ARC, it was formerly called for the OPEB, has to be 100% funded based on the actual report. Next. This is all based, these are the comments of the, if you read the S&P and the Moody's, these are their comments. And they're facts. That's what we are. And basically, that's it. I apologize for going so quick. This actually took me an hour and 20 minutes when I presented it to S&P, and I didn't want to bore you for an hour and 20 minutes by drilling down deeper. But I'll take any questions at this point.
Congratulations. You don't want to comment on the pricing results for us?
That's in my controller's report. I don't want to tip my controller's report. Actually, for the benefits of Ken Borsak, is we got 82 basis points for 5-year 5-year bonds, and we paid a higher 89 basis points for a 1-year note. The bond counsel and the financial advisor in their short 10 to 20-year terms never saw that before. So actually the 1-year pricing was higher than the 5-year. And then Mr. Mason has a question. You know, one of the things is, I think it's kudos to everybody, but they take the time, they're actually complimenting the BET. You know, the Office of the First Selectman, more so the BET and the RTM, because of your policies. You do have a BET fund balance policy, you have a debt policy, you have a cash management policy, you have boards like the Investment Advisory Committee. Something is that you asked Roland, you, plural, have been asking to do something as simple as report on economic conditions. They recognize that, and they pick up on that. And if you read the credit reviews, they say that we monitor budgetary results on a regular monthly basis. So they actually, they drill down pretty deep and look at their operations, and they compare us to our peers, you know, and that's why we get the AAA.
So
Okay.
thank you very much, Pete. I think it's,
Who's Kathy?
you know, again, this is a good way, gives us a great overview to begin our budget season. So I thank the patience of those who may have heard or seen this before. But I think Pete does it just amazingly well. But I also agree with Pete. It's all of our predecessors on the BET. It's the process and procedures that they've put into place. And it's all the hard work that not only all of us do, but also the First Selectman and Board of Selectmen, the RTM members as they review the budget after us, and all the boards and commission members. So, you know, thank you. This now, you know, people on the boards and commissions can take a look at this online, you know, on whatever we have. Channel 79 doesn't seem to work very well, but certainly YouTube does. I'm sorry? Well, it's a great service. The public loves it, and so whatever. So should we move on? We've got one more item,
Yes.
and do we have some,
I would move the minutes.
do we need to say anything that we are going to approve?
We have three members on the committee that were there, and so there's no reason why it has to be just acceptance. We can do actually an approval of minutes, and I would move that we approve the minutes
I'll
of
second that.
December 10th.
I'll second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
So
I'm going to
301?
abstain. I'm going to abstain.
301? Okay,
And
great.
I would move the adjourn.
Great. So thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.